It's a busy Monday morning. We're going to break down everything we just heard. We want to bring in Josh Hammer, Newsweek senior editor at large and host of the Josh Hammer Show. Also with us,
David Carlucci, former Democratic New York State Senator. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us here on this Monday.
I want to get to you first on this, Josh, and then, David, we'll have you answer this as well. We mentioned some of the questions that are emerging. Of course, there have been well wishes pouring in from around the world for the former president. But we're starting to hear doctors, oncologists come out and raise some questions whether or not White House doctors could have missed the early stages of this diagnosis, especially with the seriousness of where the stages are now. Could there have been something missed? And is President Trump, they're actually asking this morning, is he worried about that as well? I want to put that to you, Josh. What are you hearing among your circles in terms of that question and possibly the timing of this?
Okay, so first of all, cancer is terrible, and literally everyone, no matter what your political stripe is, no matter who you voted for, no matter what your policy preferences are, everyone wishes the president a full and speedy convalescence. I think that should be obvious. Like many families, my family has been touched in previous generations by the cancer tragedy. My great uncle's fighting it right now. Actually, this is obviously horrible, but the timing of this, Fanchin, is more than a little suspicious, shall we say. And I say that because tomorrow is this much-hyped book, Original Sin, by Jake Tapper of CNN and Alex Thompson of Axios, is coming out. This reads to me like an information operation from the Biden circle and their Praetorian Guard from their apologists to basically deflect from this imminently forthcoming Tapper-Thompson book, Original Sin, trying to trot out the cancer diagnosis and basically to make that therefore untouchable, because cancer is obviously terrible, and this is part of kind of the Biden family's story for decades now. Biden is a man who has infamously been touched by many personal tragedies going back literally 50 plus years. And when the Biden family tends to be in a tough situation, he oftentimes plays the personal card, how he lost his first wife, Beau Biden, and cancer and all that there. So he plays his card over and over and over again there. And it seems to me like that is what is happening now. This simply, it doesn't pass the laugh test that he could have possibly developed prostate cancer that was so intense so as to metastasize to the bone, to use the exact language, literally since January 20th, less than 4 months ago. No one in a million years believes that at this point there. So it seems to me that the Occam's razor, that the simplest conclusion is that this was just part of the cover-up that we know about and that the American people have known about for many, many years now there. So it seems like the timing is a bit of a desperate attempt to try to steer away from this forthcoming book tomorrow there, but I don't think the American people are going to buy it.
David, not just this book, but several books have been written that we've talked about and covered the last several months about his cognitive decline, mainly because Team Biden wanted him to run again in 2024, but way before that. So let's go back to a speech in July of 2022 when he said during the speech about coal mining, I have cancer, and most of the people that I grew up with have cancer as well, that I grew up with. The White House said, oh, he's talking about skin cancer he had removed years later. Let's don't think anything about it. But is it okay, David, to sit there and go back to that going, wait a second, if they covered up a lot of this decline, according to these books that have been written, his cognitive decline, did they cover up this? And it wasn't just a statement, but it was true.
Well, first, I think the important part of all of this is that we stop it with these conspiracy theories. I mean, come on, none of us here are doctors, as far as I know, to be making these accusations about the motives of talking about a cancer diagnosis. I think the bigger part is we talked about the big, beautiful bill that Trump is talking about. I hope and wish that our country would continue to focus on finding cures to cure cancer, to treat cancer. And now, under the Trump administration, all of that is going to the wayside. All the cuts to the research that's being done, the breakthroughs that we're on the cusp of having are really being put on the back burner. And that's the unfortunate part of it. So I'm hopeful that with this diagnosis, that more people will obviously pay attention to it, do their part in getting screened, but also demand Congress and the president to continue what we have done as leaders of this, not just in the nation, but of the world, in terms of advancing technological and medical breakthroughs. But to talk about cover-up and conspiracies, I think it's really rich, considering the questions that were asked at this press conference today about the plane from Qatar, the Trump administration being in the Middle East, or the Trump companies being in the Middle East right before Trump was there, talking about an 80-story building that they want to have in Doha. I mean, the list of things that show a perception of a quid pro quo is really devastating, and I think we need to address those. But to comment on someone's health, I think is really risky, especially when you have no medical background whatsoever. So
David,
I really
David.
hesitate to go down that road.
No, that makes sense. My dad died of cancer. We saw the signs. Not only was it announced, but we saw physically. A lot of us have dealt with that, with the cancer diagnosis. I'm not in my basement. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. He mentioned that he had cancer in a speech in July of 2022. So it's perfectly normal for me, a journalist, to ask you, a pundit, and someone who's worked, this isn't a Republican or Democratic thing. We saw the signs on stage stumbling that he covered up the diagnosis. There are books written by everyone under the sun on both sides of that. I'm simply asking you a question. In July of 2022, did Joe Biden announce that he had cancer, and was that covered up by the White House?
Well, I have no evidence whatsoever. I don't think anyone does to say that there was a cover-up.
Okay, fair enough.
Can you point to any evidence whatsoever? All of these things are accusations or opinions. This coming out book that comes out on the 20th, I've read the excerpts. It points to no new information other than how some people felt on stage when they saw the president.
Yeah.
But the reality is that if someone wanted to run for president, they could. But the polling showed that Democrats were really in lockstep with the president, and not because of his physical abilities, but because of the actions and the results that he had in office. If we compare the first 100 days of Biden to the Trump administration, a lot of the Trump administration, there's nothing really cohesive about this. We have no real standing legislation. We have executive orders. We have a lot of promises, but then we have excuses. You know, we heard about the Ukraine conflict, the war there, that was going to be ended in 24 hours. Well, that's not the case. We just heard the press secretary talk about Gaza and ending the conflict in Gaza in Israel. But meanwhile, when Trump was in the Middle East, he didn't visit Israel. So it seems like it wasn't a top priority. What was a top priority was making deals, business deals. And yes, that's an important part for the president, but it shouldn't be the top priority. The top priority should be bringing peace and stability to our nation and to our strongest allies around the globe.
Well, I think it's good you brought up some of the bigger issues that are coming out. I just want to make sure that we just stick to what we are finding out about a lot of these things. First of all, I believe, just to kind of clear the air, that it's oncologists and doctors who are actually coming out questioning how and if this diagnosis was missed and how someone can get cancer at this far stage.
All accusations.
Well,
there's no smoking gun of a cover-up whatsoever. And
David, I'm not saying there's a cover-up. I'm saying there are oncologists asking the question based on the severity of prostate cancer and how it is affecting so many American families. I do want to talk about some of the bigger issues that came out as well as that one. The big, beautiful bill. We heard the press secretary address the big, beautiful bill. She says it's one step closer to passing some of the largest and most historic legislation in our nation's history. Josh, I want to give you an opportunity to go through what you think are some key elements of this bill, because at one point this weekend, it was blocked, it was passed, and now it's moving one step closer.
Okay, so just allow me to just very quickly respond to what I just heard, and then I'll address your question, Fanny.
Absolutely.
So just real quickly, we heard already on Morning Joe this morning on MSNBC. Morning Joe, by the way, a morning program that was one of the leading tips of the spear, shall we say, pushing back against allegations that Joe Biden was suffering any mental or cognitive decline there. Joe Biden and Mika Brzezinski were adamant that he was at his highest form possible. There are clips of this from Joe Scarborough about a year ago or so. He had on his show just this morning Zeke Emanuel, the brother of Rahm Emanuel and Ari Emanuel, one of the famous Emanuel brothers. Zeke Emanuel is a doctor. He has been teaching at top medical schools, UPenn, for decades and decades. And he essentially said this morning that it is entirely implausible. plausible that this thing could have possibly just happened here or since January 20th over the past 100, 200 days or so there. So there actually are, Fanchin, to your point, some medical authorities who just over the past 12 to 24 hours now increasingly are talking and speaking out here and saying that this is kind of a 1 in a million chance of a not just any random kind of in-house doctor, but the White House doctor. I mean, like a pretty important doctor, of a very important doctor missing a screamingly obvious cancer diagnosis, or this looks like something a bit more nefarious. For what my money is worth, I would go with the latter and not the former. But, you know, Fanchin, to your question about the so-called big, beautiful bill, well, first of all, just on the politics of this, you know, holding aside the policy just for a second here, the politics of this are very good for President Donald Trump, right? Because he definitely was facing backlash there. We saw what happened in committee in the House Budget Committee last week. You had some fiscal conservatives, Congressman Chip Roy of Texas and various others who objected there. So the fact that this bill actually got through committee, holding the policy merits aside, I think speaks to the power of the president's bully pulpit. He clearly worked hand in glove here with Speaker Mike Johnson there, trying to kind of wrangle these fiscal conservatives in line and to get this bill passed. As far as the contents of the bill there, look, my personal preference there, I mean, maybe I'm a creature of another era, Fanchin there. My personal preference is to kind of be somewhat intuitively skeptical of the entire notion of a big, beautiful bill. You know, once upon a time, I think conservatives preferred kind of smaller, incremental, let's kind of read every very careful line item here, make sure everything is good. Let's not all cram it in together there. But, you know, this president is very heterodox. He doesn't subscribe necessarily to yesterday's orthodoxy. So he wanted it done in a slightly different fashion there. I thought Carolyn Levitt at this press conference ran through some of the highlights there. The president is following through in a lot of his campaign promises when it comes to real, meaningful fiscal relief for blue-collar workers, the no taxes on tip. He made that on the campaign trail back in Las Vegas, Nevada, with a huge tip industry, if memory serves. The fact that he has now gotten that in this bill, I think, is a tremendous credit to him on his fulfilling his campaign promises. I will say, though, to kind of voice to the fiscal conservatives, the ones who voted against this bill in committee last week there, something's going to happen when it comes to America's annual deficit and our debt woes. We obviously saw the credit downgrade over this weekend on at least one of the major credit ratings there. Something's going to happen here when it comes to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. No one wants to talk about this issue. It's the least politically popular issue in America to talk about there, but those really are the structural long-term drivers of our debt there. And unless and until we deal with it there, I continue to believe that we're only just going to risk further credit downgrades and potentially, not necessarily tomorrow, but at some point in the next, call it 10 to 20 years, give or take there, at some point, there's going to be a point of no return when it comes to our fiscal situation.
All right, David, you have about 1:30. Sorry, I wish we had more time for you. Democrats keep saying that the Trump administration, that this big, beautiful bill cuts Medicaid. How is that? Be very specific about 1:30.
Yeah, well, it's kicking the can down the road, that's for sure, in terms of many fiscal experts are saying it's close to a $5 trillion deficit add over the next decade. But yeah, if you call historic making the enrollment period for the Affordable Care Act, shortening that enrollment period, that's what this bill does. We've already seen cuts to SAMHSA, addiction treatment. We're looking at over $11 billion in cuts to addiction treatment programs across the country in a time when we've been making progress. We're rolling that back. We have SNAP is being cut back. We have work requirements that are being added on. So it's interesting to me to see that we're kicking the can down the road, adding almost $5 trillion to the national deficit. We're cherry picking and saying, hey, we're going to cut taxes on tips and overtime, but these same workers are going to have a harder time to get enrolled in the Affordable Care Act, have a harder time accessing SNAP benefits or just Medicaid in general. So it's, take from one hand, give to the other. I really don't see anything historic about this except for the legacy of debt we're bringing to our children and our grandchildren and doing nothing substantial to change anything going forward. Just cutting back on the things that have made America the top nation in the world, focusing on technological and medical advancements. This bill guts that. Okay. So that's why people are upset, from the conservatives to the liberals. They're really not happy with this. And I think it's going to be a hard time getting this done. And to say the things that people have fought for in the districts, the swing districts, like the SALT tax deduction, that's nowhere to be found. So, nothing for middle class families other than saying there's extending these tax cuts.
All right.
And that's unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, this is, like you said, one big, beautiful bill. There's going to be a lot for both sides to break down and to examine as we go forward. The White House is saying it saves $1.6 trillion. They said any cuts, most of those cuts are because of waste, fraud, and abuse, so that they can make sure that American citizens have access to health care. So, like I said, there's going to be a lot more to break down and examine as this bill moves forward. Josh Hammer, David Carlucci, thank both of you for your incredible insight this morning. Good to see you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.